set for December of this year. Canada forced me to serious plan to take a hand with it, and this is it. The bill also allows for a number of measures to be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And under an NDP government, these will include putting a price on carbon and establishing hard emission caps for large industrial emitters, setting emission limits for Canada's largest polluters, ensuring that they pay for the pollution that they emit, and ending, of course, the $1.3 billion a year in annual subsidies to the fossil fuel industries in Canada, ending the perversity of subsidizing our own environmental devastation. And of course, it would include investing at long last in clean energy programs. In all of this, there is an opportunity to usher in transformative change in how we actually produce energy. And according to Clean Energy Canada, a global commitment to getting to the targets set out in the Climate Change Accountability Act requires $44 trillion worth of investment in clean energy. In Canada, we have made a start in this industry with 37% job growth between 2009 and 2013, so that more Canadians are actually employed in renewable energy industry than in the oil sands. And yet we in Canada have captured just 1% of today's $1 trillion global clean energy industry, and we're being left out and left behind. It is notable that the China-U.S. Climate Change Pact signed last November was not just about climate change, it was also about clean energy cooperation. And yet this government breached the opportunity before us with, as the Director of Clean Energy Canada put it, quote, indifference. So while other national governments and in Canada subnational governments too make the clean energy industry a priority, this federal government continues to raise the stakes for all of us on the fossil fuel economy, tearing to the ground environmental regulation and a desperate effort to get Canada's oil out of Canada by whatever means possible without regard to environmental risk or social license. And as the NDP Urban Affairs, Infrastructure and Deputy Transport critic, I have to point out that what is being ignored is the great opportunity that exists in our cities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Cities are responsible, as you will know, for the end use of 3/4 of our fossil fuels and consequently a commensurate amount of greenhouse gas emissions. With those numbers, I think the math clearly tells us that we cannot get to the levels required to avoid dangerous climate change without our cities looking and functioning very differently than they do today. And that, I think, is a good news story, because in averting dangerous levels of global warming, we are forced to build the kinds of cities, communities, and neighborhoods that we actually want to live in. Building the smart climate low carbon city means rethinking how we live in, what we live in, how we move around our cities. It means cities friendly to pedestrians and cyclists. It means trees and green, a different, more local food system, and resilient infrastructure. It means that vision set out in my recently released urban white paper, and also more still things that we have yet to invent, yet to conceive of, perhaps. Cities around the world and here in Canada are moving to this future. They're innovating. And in those cities, we have a generation of young Canadians who are eager to get engaged in building the kinds of cities that they want to live in. In all of this, there is opportunity for you, for students, for universities to get engaged in research and innovation, and not just of the techie kind, but social and economic innovation as well. So yes, it's imperative that we reach certain emissions reduction targets and stabilize the changes to our climate that we have set afoot, but it ought not to be lost in all of this that it is an exciting future that awaits us if we rise to this challenge of climate change. And so people ask me, well, how is your bill going to actually succeed in the House and bring about change? And that question brings me full circle to one of the questions that we were asked, and that is the question of electoral reform and proportional representation. The Climate Change Accountability Act actually symbolizes, I think, the need for change, for democratic reform. The bill's history through our parliament is the best advertisement for electoral change and indeed institutional change. An earlier iteration of this bill made it through the House of Commons under a minority government, pre the false majority that currently exists. But it was the unelected Senate that defeated it and set us back by years on this issue. Now, we cannot pretend that it is the fault of that institution as opposed to the fault of the parties that fill it with their bagmen and hacks, of course, but there is a long tradition of parties doing through the appointed senators what they dare not do with their elected representatives in the House of Commons. But it all points to the need for democratic reform, which indeed includes a change of the electoral process from the first past the post system to proportional representation. In the view of the NDP, a mixed member form of proportional representation. This has been the NDP's position since the 1970s, when it had in our former leader, Ed Broadbent, a great champion. More recently, Tom Mulcair has made clear his and our NDP commitment to making 2015 the last unfair election federally in Canada, and 2019 the first election conducted under a truly democratic electoral system. So in December, our democratic reform critic Craig Scott put forward a motion in the House calling on just that to happen, to make this next federal election the last conducted under the first past the post system and bring in a mixed member ER system. Unfortunately, it was defeated roundly. We had the support of the two Green Party MPs in the House of Commons, I'm happy to say, but all Conservative MPs and half of the Liberal caucus, including their leader, Justin Trudeau, voted against it. And I see Professor Wiseman telling me to sit down. I will do that immediately. Thank you.
I'm going to take my time getting the mic. Some people who are in the hall there want to find seats. It's a good time to get yourself comfy. But I know I only have 10 minutes. I don't want to waste it. I'm trying to watch the. Oh, there's a nice big clock right here. Oh, good. Well, thank you. And I want to start by acknowledging two things. First, that we're on the traditional territory of Mississauga of New Credit First Nation. And I am happy to reach out across Skype to the traditional territories of other First Nations. And very grateful to the organizers, particularly Alice Root, for organizing this event and bringing so many people together. And the other thing, of course, I want to acknowledge and thank Matthew for it as well, who's pointing out that we had to cross picket lines to come here today. And I think it's a national scandal how sessional lecturers, TAs, and insecure academic professionals are treated within our university system. And solidarity to the local 3992, and I'm very sorry that I think the climate issue and all of you here in this room and people across the country wanting information about climate made it absolutely worthwhile that we're here. But it's a hard thing for us. From Professor Wiseman's introduction of my brief bio, I pick up on two things that directly relate to the climate issue. One of them is that of my now 8 books. One was co-authored with my friend Zoe Karen, who's now working for a wildlife fund in Norway. But it's actually Global Warming for Dummies. And it's in the actual Dummies series. When I was working on it, I had people saying, gee, aren't you worried those dummies people are going to sue you or something? Your title, your cover looks just like one of those real dummies books. Well, it was, in fact, one of those real dummies books. And I've had occasion to give it to many people. And I've been working on climate change a very long time, which is the other thing under the bio. Having worked as senior policy advisor to the Federal Minister of Environment from 1986 to 88, I was recruited by the Minister of Environment, which was an odd thing since I wasn't a conservative. But they wanted someone in the minister's office who was actually an environmental activist. A number of people in this room know me as an anti-nuclear, anti-pesticide activist, like Dorothy Golden Rosenberg and Lynn McDonald, the people who knew me way before you at Sierra Club. I've been working on environmental issues since I was a teenager. And I came into the Minister of Environment's office, and that's where I started to learn about the climate issue. Because I was, at that point, as I said, an activist on a number of other issues. But I sat with the Minister of Environment when Environment Canada scientists, we had Environment Canada scientists in those days, and Environment Canada scientists would brief the Minister on the science of what they were seeing coming if we continued to increase our dependency on fossil fuels, if we didn't get off fossil fuels, if we didn't reduce greenhouse gases, we would be looking at a future impact called climate change. I can remember the briefings really well because I both found them terrifying and convincing. And the nightmare of the whole thing for me is that I've been working on the climate issue for 29 years. And in that period of time, the things that were once just predictions are now headlines. And as Matthew said, we had a lot of procrastination, a lot of denial, and a lot of loss of time. We did, in fact, have a reasonably decent climate plan in 2005. And of course, as soon as, and it was Paul Martin's government that brought it out, but it was immediately canceled, not by a vote in Parliament, but by the Prime Minister acting alone when Stephen Harper canceled the only climate plan we've had and proceeded to ramp up greenhouse gases. There are a lot of milestones on the way to where we are now. But where we are now is desperate last measures to avoid runaway global warming. We no longer have the capacity, technologically or in terms of atmospheric chemistry, to avoid climate change. We have loaded the atmosphere with greenhouse gases to such an extent that we now have more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere than any time in the last at least 800,000 years by direct measurement of air bubbles and Antarctic ice cores. We know that we are 30% more CO2 in the atmosphere than at any time in roughly 1 million years as compared to the levels, and we had greenhouse gas levels never above 280 parts per million. And we're now hovering very near the 400 parts per million mark. Scientists had anticipated this. Some published papers in the late 1800s, if not a controversial concept, that loading the atmosphere with gases that cause warming without the natural greenhouse effect, this planet would be far too cold to sustain any kind of life at all. So we know the greenhouse effect, we understand it. It's been through all of humanity's history, it's been entirely beneficial. If we hadn't had it, we wouldn't be here at all. Okay, so fast forward where we are now, we are in a situation of a danger zone where some people will argue the thresholds have already been crossed. We can't know that. I have been involved in this issue for so long and keep firmly believing and looking at the science and crunching the numbers all the time to know that we still have the possibility globally to avoid 2 degrees global average temperature increase above the levels of temperature before the Industrial Revolution. I've been participating in all the UN climate negotiations, and the next one coming up is the deadline for a replacement treaty. We should have had one in Copenhagen. That was a complete train wreck. I'm happy to talk about what happened there if anyone wants to know. It was a disaster. We can't afford a disaster in Paris. This is not a debate between Liberals, Greens, and NDPers. I want to make that really clear. This is about saving Canada from Stephen Harper and getting a climate plan in time for Paris. We've got to figure out how to work it out. And we can work it out because I think the next parliament will be a minority parliament, and with enough Green MPs who will work with anybody. We're absolutely shameless in our willingness to work with anyone who's willing to step up. Because when I sat in those negotiations in Lima, December of 2014, I saw what was really missing in the room. There's no contest that there's now fierce competition for worst country in the room. We used to own it, you know, that podium, we owned that podium. Worst country in the room, Canada under Stephen Harper. Now we've got competition with Australia under Tony Abbott. We've got mushy middle countries. We used to have strong leadership from the European Union. They're quite compromised by a number of domestic issues within the EU. What's missing in the room isn't the worst country in the room. What's missing in the room is leadership. So when I look forward to Paris, I'm looking forward to a new parliament. I think in terms of what parliament looks like, not like necessarily what government looks like. What does parliament look like? And can we get it together from the opposition benches where we will have more MPs than anything else through cooperation to actually go to Paris, not just with a better Canadian plan, but with a plan for Canada to bring forward tough negotiators, the best diplomats we ever had, and a team that goes to Paris and negotiates the treaty the world needs, because we're not going to get another chance. Now, in terms of our domestic policies as Greens, because that's part of the question I was asked to answer, We've always favored carbon pricing and removing subsidies. That's so basic. The World Bank, the IMF, absolutely everyone around the world now calls for that, except for some Canadian parties. We would bring in carbon pricing through fee and dividend. So the fee would probably be around $200, $225 a ton, which would deliver about $5,000 to every Canadian. That's back of the envelope stuff, but roughly right. Now, to maximize energy efficiency. In this country, we still waste more than half the energy we use. That's still our low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit for so long, we're stomping all over it. We are the squashed fruit on the ground on that one. We can do that. And we've seen leadership from the provincial and government of Ontario shutting down coal-fired power plants. That's the number one thing we need to do. Alberta's coal-fired power plants still, at this point, produce roughly the same amount of greenhouse gases as the oil sands. So the thing we need to do is go after coal-fired power and shut it down everywhere. We're encouraged by China's commitment to have 20% of its electricity grid renewables, but China's coal-fired power still represents a real threat. But every country has to move as fast and aggressively as it can to decarbonize its economy. And that's something we need to talk about more. We need fuel switching. Our vehicle fleet should be switching very rapidly to either new fuels, hybrids, or electric vehicles as much as possible. And then we're not producing our electricity from coal anymore, which means we need a better Canadian grid that we can sell and buy and share in, the electricity from the renewable provinces into the ones that are making the transition off coal. There's a lot of detail here I can't get into, but I just want to, with the last, I think I have a minute left, say that this is not an issue that stands as one of many priorities. This is the priority. Naomi Klein had it right. This changes everything. This is not about tweaking at the edges or the margins of our society. This is a transformational change of our economy. This will require rapid, aggressive action to avoid 2 degrees, and not just from Canada. From every country around the world, we are going to need significant commitment to put fossil fuels on the shelves of history altogether. Coal, natural gas, oil, all of it. We have to rapidly move off fossil fuels so that we're using roughly 90% less than today by mid-century 2050. Yes, that's ambitious, but we did it faster than that when we moved from horse and buggies into cars. We have had technological innovations. We've had transformational change. This time, we do it because we're planning it, because our life depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the organizers for putting this together. It's a very good way to kick off election debates, may I say. I have some sensitivities over teaching assistants. My son has been one for the last few years, and I have lived this experience. I want to, before I begin, acknowledge that Adam Vaughn, my colleague, is here. Adam is the MP for this particular area in East Rhode Island. So welcome, Adam, and thank you for coming. Elizabeth, I thought, laid out the issue of science rather well, and I'm not going to get into that because I think those of you who are here probably are as familiar as anyone with the issues of science. I'm going to talk, however, about the politics of this debate. I had some hand in drafting the 2006 budget, 2005-6 budget, which was presented by the Martin government, which was at that time, and I think actually Elizabeth was not in politics at that time, and acknowledged it as the greenest budget that had ever been presented to the Canadian Parliament. That was then, and now is now, and you know what happened to that one. I was also part of the party that presented the 2008 election platform on the green shift under Mr. Dion, and you know what happened on that one. In fact, I took off my shirt because of the scars, which would be an undesired. And so I'm going to focus, if you will, on the politics of this, because as others rightly identified, this is the challenge of our time. As you know, Mr. Trudeau is our new leader, and his approach to the unique entity that is Canada is a far more collaborative approach. And he has talked to many of the premiers across the country, particularly Premiers Couillard and Wynne, but also Gallant and McLean and various others, and talked to them specifically about how are we going to get from here to there so that we are not the international pariahs that we are. And I would say that he's made some progress in that, because you will notice, those of you who watch these things closely, Premier Wynne is talking about going to a cap and trade system. That would make Canada's two largest provinces, Quebec and Ontario, would then have a cap and trade system. That, along with British Columbia, which already has a carbon tax, and Alberta, which has an emitters process. Some say it's not a very efficient one, but nevertheless it is a recognition of a pricing of carbon, would put something in the order of 80 to 85% of the Canadian population under some form of carbon pricing. So think about that. BC, Alberta, Quebec, and about to be Ontario, already under some form of carbon pricing. All, may I say, without any leadership from the current Prime Minister. If that is the model that is the most appropriate model, and we are suggesting that it is, it does in fact parallel elements of our healthcare model. And our healthcare model is essentially that provinces administer the system, provinces set the standards, if you had an active government, which you don't have in this particular case, you have an active government, you would have if you will, a best practices model that would work for all of the provinces in the healthcare system. Mr. Trudeau has said, we don't really care how you get to your goal. What we care about is setting that goal, and that collectively that goal meets whatever targets are ultimately negotiated in Paris. And therein is the issue. So we're a bit agnostic as to whether it's a carbon tax, whether it's revenue neutral, or whether it's actually generates revenues, or if you're a large emitter, if you think that's the way you can get to your goal, we'll be fine with that as well. Or if you think it's a cap and trade system, we'll be fine with that. But collectively, we are going to get to this goal. So Mr. Trudeau has said quite categorically that he will go to Paris if he's elected as the Prime Minister. And within 150 days of his election, he will convene and implement an entire national carbon pricing system, so that we will start to be serious about carbon pricing. And may I say, Mr. Trudeau picked the last place most of you in this room would go to announce a carbon pricing system. He went to Calgary, Alberta. And not only did he go to Calgary, Alberta, he went to the Petroleum Club. And he went to Calgary, Alberta, and to the Petroleum Club, and he reminded them that his last name is Trudeau, as if they needed to be reminded. And he said to them, you know we need to price carbon. You know we need to price carbon. That's not to a fine group of people such as you here at the University of Toronto who are already probably fairly convinced that this is a good idea. This is to the people that you actually have to convince that a price has to be put on their livelihood, on their product that they are producing. and which is doing such a substantial damage to the atmosphere. So, as I say, I'm not approaching this from a scientific standpoint. I think the science is settled. 98 or 99% of the scientists of this world can't actually be wrong. As I see it, this is a matter of politics. This is a matter of how to get from here to there. This is a matter of attitude by the senior level of government, and this is a matter of adapting to whatever works, whatever approach works. And if one province chooses to use one approach and another province chooses to use another, I don't think that we're going to be overly upset about it. But the goals will be set, and they will be national goals. And the national goals will break down in disaggregates according to the provincial goals. So let me start to wind up there. I did want to talk a bit about the issue of proportional representation. We, as a party, committed in Montreal to proportional representation. We are a little bit more mixed, actually split, about mixed proportional representation. And let me relate a little story that I had with a person who has worked in Ontario elections and worked in the latest New Zealand election. And their comment, having worked in the New Zealand election, where it is a mixed proportional representation, was that it actually created a kind of a stasis in the party, because if you lost your constituency, you automatically went on the list. And so so in effect, you got no turnover in the MPs. And so that individual had gone with an enthusiasm towards mixed proportional and came back with something less than a great enthusiasm. So our concern is, and it's been expressed by Mr. Trudeau, is that we're open to the idea of changing first past the post. We'd like to do it on the basis of evidence. It is in some respects a once in a lifetime opportunity to change up the system. We're all convinced about the limitations of first past the post, and if you ever needed any more evidence, the 2011 election was Exhibit A. But be careful of what you wish for, because you have to think through of all of the other elements that come with different systems. So let me finish there. I do adopt Matthew's view that there are real issues with respect to how we could get to a real climate change policy that we may only be able to get to where there has been where there is a collaboration among the parties in a post-election situation. So I thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay. My understanding of the program is that speakers not going to get 3 minutes, and we're able to respond to anything that the other 2 speakers said, or to address any of the other. We were doing 5 questions here. I didn't move them all out, but some of them have already been addressed. So, Matthew, would you like to respond to something that Elizabeth John said, or pick up on any of these other issues?
Sure. Can you hear me through this microphone there? Bring that close. All right. Yeah, sure. I think that the 3 parties you see at the front here have all made expressions of concern about the issue. I think we all carry different histories into this, and those histories ought to inform voters, since this is a pre-election discussion. But I think the comments from everybody suggest that there is hope I guess I would comment mostly on what John is saying about his leaders talk out in Calgary. I understood he going to say, yes, my name is Trudeau, but I'm not my father. I do support Keystone XL, and I will not lead on this issue. And the comments I've heard quoted from Justin seem to suggest to me some application of responsibility at the federal level for this issue. I don't see, frankly, as practically workable that we can leave it to all provinces to implement what they see fit in terms of carbon pricing. I think there's a national discussion that needs to take place between the federal government and subnational governments, and we have to arrive collaboratively at a way forward. I think there's too much economically at stake for everybody. One of the great concerns with carbon pricing is the issue of leakage. That unless you are working collaboratively at a national level and indeed at an international level, then you will see flight of industry to other places to escape carbon pricing. So I think it is incumbent on the federal government, and it's captured in the Climate Change Accountability Act, to take a very strong leadership position on this. By leadership, I mean working collaboratively with other governments. One of the main changes we made to the Climate Change Accountability Bill since it was first tabled in 2007 Act is to relax, in a sense, the standards recognizing that provinces have left ahead of the federal government on these issues. And John and most noted, we have across the country now different carbon pricing schemes, and but it is left, I think, with another federal government to work with those provinces and figure out how these things work together. And only in doing so can we bring leadership to the international stage, so that Canada, as a nation, can be that leader and know, in fact, different podium than the one that we have the last few years at the international stage at conferences of parties.
I'll just jump in on some things that occurred to me to share. Yeah, it's funny. I also went to Calgary to debate pipeline and why keep debate stopping Keystone reduction in the economy. So they can be friendly with all kinds of folks there. I don't know if they had a good reception. I wanted to talk about where we go in terms of understanding that. This is one of the questions that was raised about leaving it in the ground. Does my part, so it's about the bitumen oil sands question. And just to dig into that a little bit, the International Energy Agency, in their report 2 years ago, pointed out that to avoid the runaway, and I've used the term runaway global warming. If anyone wants a definition of what that is, I've thrown it out here without necessarily knowing if everybody's comfortable with it, familiar with it. But of course, it's where the positive feedback loops of burning fossil fuels result in loss of Arctic ice, which leads to rapidly warming waters because the Arctic ice and the function of the albedo effect is lost, and so on. So there's also, of course, drier conditions lead to more forest fires, which release greenhouse gases. There are lots of, unfortunately, they're called positive feedback loops. There's nothing positive about them. So that's why we must ensure that we hold greenhouse gas and hold the global average temperature to no more than 2. 2 is dangerous. The draft text that we still have before us, that could be in the Paris Agreement, still leave open the possibility of 1.5. But to hold global average temperature increase to less than 1.5 is really technologically difficult to even figure out how you do it at the most ambitious, aggressive level. But it is the right goal, because 2 degrees itself is dangerous. If you start looking at scenarios of 3 and 4 and 5, you're going to inevitably end at 7 and 8. These are global averages. So it really is quite problematic whether human civilization itself can survive that anywhere. So going back to the IEA, the International Energy Agency looked at these numbers and said, okay, to avoid that 2 degrees, we have to ensure that 2/3 of all known reserves of fossil fuels around the world stay in the ground until at least 2050. Means that we have unburnable carbon. This concept of unburnable carbon is another important thing that will affect valuation of large transnational oil companies. We're now looking at companies that are actually, and companies with valuations of stock markets. Wait, that large multinational values itself based on reserves that it can't use. This is also something you can Google under carbon bubble and look it up. So we're actually moving in a direction globally where people are realizing that bitumen is really too dangerous to burn, and certainly we can produce bitumen out of the oil sands in the indefinite future, changing its product direction from burning to feedstock for petrochemical industry, for plastics, for all kinds of other things besides burning bitumen. But we certainly can't have Energy East or Keystone or Kinder Morgan or Enbridge and make our climate targets.
Let me pick up on the issue of the carbon bubbles, and that's an issue that Mark Carney, former governor of Canada, wherever you are, the equivalent in Great Britain, has been talking about. And his analysis is a financial analysis. Mark is a very capable individual and quite knowledgeable about the environmental issues, but he's really coming at it from a financial standpoint. And his argument is quite simple, that the values of a lot of industries that have as their major assets oil fields or pipelines or this and that, is in a 2-degree scenario grossly overvalued. So your shares in Petro-Canada or Esso or pick your carbon company are actually a bit of a bubble. And that at some point or another, some crisis might happen, similar to the 2008 crisis, where bank stocks just deflated massively and put us all into a substantial financial crisis. So Mark's argument is analogous to that, and I think it is something that may actually move people's behavior a little bit more quickly than if you will, the argument in science. The argument in science is pretty well conclusive and gets scarier every day. The trouble with the scarier arguments is that it creates a paralysis. People just freeze. They don't know what to do. You know, people in this room probably will do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, but 90% of the population will only be influenced by what's going to cost me to transport myself or to keep my home or whatever. And I think, if you will, if I'm looking at trends, I think that's actually where behavior will get changed. I look at the U.S.-China agreement. I don't think that actually China enters into any great global agreement with the United States because they're terribly concerned about carbon bubbles or greenhouse gases. I think it's much more fundamental than that. I think they figured out that they can't breathe. It's pretty simple. Like, breathing is not optional for most human beings. It's becoming a fairly serious issue. In Beijing, they're having difficulty recruiting foreign nationals because after 6 months they got asthma, they got some sort of breathing issue that comes up, and their families won't go with the foreign national. So people act out of their own self-interest, and I would say that that's kind of where the conversation is going to have to go. And being serious about carbon pricing is, in fact, I think, a behavioral modification writ large, and it's largely driven by people's pocketbooks.
Thank you. Well, Alice, I think are we going over to UPC now? Or should we have, we've got questions from the audience. And these have been selected. 2 questions that each of you will also get 2 minutes on this. Okay,
so we're going to have a call for questions. We'll be handing out cards And you can write your question on them. I will be talking about it in 2 minutes.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes. Let's get to it. How would we describe the obligation, if any, that we have toward future generations? Why not just say all 3 questions? What was the greenhouse gas emissions total in 2014 for Canada and gigafacts? Is this below or above 2015? Does Canada get oil from the Middle East, and is this oil dirtier than the tar sands?
To anyone who can just jump in?
Well, why don't we just do it the way we designed it?
So the first question,
Was how would you describe the obligation that we have toward
Excuse me,
future
my question
generations?
is, how come you have questions and we haven't been asked the specific questions as far as I know, and I haven't.
I don't know.
And I wait for people to make it clear.
Well, I understand that.
Not very democratic.
I understand that more sheets are being handed out. Okay. Now, I have to say, it won't be possible to handle everyone's questions here, because we will also we will be going to UBC, which is in on this broadcast, and Dalhousie University. So those are the questions given to you.
so with respect to question number 1, so how long do we have?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. So with respect to question 1, how do we characterize, I mean, this is, I think, intergenerational inequity. We have, I think, a moral requirement to ensure that we leave, or that we look around, that we don't leave this burden that we would create on the next generation. The intergenerational inequity, I think, is probably the largest inequity that we're looking at these days. It's generally unspoken, and it's not restricted to the issue of climate, but it is an economic and social one as well. I've seen the backpack in front of me. It reminds me that Tom O'Hare talks all the time about leaving in the backpacks of youth today, the largest debt burdens in both climate and economic terms of any generation that has come before. And so this is something, you know, we talk about intergenerational. Yes, I'm talking about my kids. You know, we're all talking about our own children becoming loud as opposed to different generations. And it's not something that we want to leave to our children. So that's that one. The challenge the challenge that we have not met in this country on the emissions issue, and the great challenge before us is decoupling economic growth and emission growth. And there is a great hope, I think, out there when one looks around the world internationally and even from subnational governments here in Canada that this is most definitely possible, that we can continue to grow economically and reduce our emissions at the same time. It's happening in Europe and right here at home in Ontario, where we are sitting now. And that is largely owing to the issue of coal-fired plants and closure of those plants in Ontario. It's Ontario's major initiative so far. In terms of where the dirty oil comes from, so much of the discourse, I think, around climate change is in a sense unfortunate, because it's about dirty oil, it's about comparison, it's about stockiness, it's about pipelines. And I would like to reframe, and try an opening discussion, to reframe the argument in terms of the demand response and the opportunities that we have before us by responding to demand for oil. We will not need to, 10 seconds, we will not need to worry about pipelines that would crush demand for fossil fuels in this country. And this is why I raised the issue of cities, because in our cities, by building the cities we want to live in, then we need to make enormous leaps towards this issue of making oil simply uneconomic.
3 minutes on the same questions, but obviously, the issue of leaving this as to the future generations is sometimes dealt with as if it would be unfair to leave them the burden, sort of the same way that we would want to leave to them. I'm not criticizing Matthew when this like the economic and social burdens to be reversed. The thing that makes this particularly immoral burden on criminals is that our kids can't fix this. We've got exactly till December in Paris to come up with a global treaty that actually reduces greenhouse gases or puts us on a path to do so. We don't have a lot of time. Now, there are encouraging signs, and I think we should emphasize those things that are encouraging. One is that last year was the first year globally when investments in renewables outpaced investments in fossil fuels. Now, that's people investing their money who want to make money. The smart money is no longer on fossils. The smart money is moving to solar and wind, and geothermal, and a whole range of new technologies, tidal, and of course conservation and energy efficiency, which are still, as I mentioned, the low-hanging fruit and easy to do and quick to make a change. And there are some very specific questions about oil. About half the oil that Canadians use still comes from 5 countries imported to eastern Canada: Nigeria, Kazakhstan, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and the Fitzgerald from Norway. And it's, I think, one of the underlying craziness aspects, one of the underlying crazy aspects of this debate is we don't have a Canadian energy policy. We know that the provinces, for the first time ever, the premiers, when they meet, say, we need an energy policy. Now that's new. It used to be in the old days, when I first worked in public policy around energy, that if a prime minister ever suggested Canada needs an energy policy, the premier of Alberta at the time, whoever it was at the time, would always say, no, you can't have a national energy policy. That sounds too much like what Trudeau did back in the 70s. We won't have it. We now have the premiers, including Alberta, saying they want a national energy policy, which is a golden opportunity to actually get one. And within that, one might have principles like energy security. We shouldn't be importing foreign oil if we don't have to. We should be using domestic, while we rapidly ramp down our dependency on fossil fuels by ramping up our renewable capacity. So a national energy policy can embed within it the climate plan that decarbonizes our economy, and we should be doing it rather rapidly. But there's no point comparing, by the way, those lying idiots who made up ethical oil as a concept. And they ignore the fact that all their lovely pipelines, which they want to fight to the death, bringing these stupid pipelines, are not Canadian product 100%. Because bitumen is a solid, and it does not flow. So they, Enbridge, in its project, in its submission to the National Energy Board, confirms that it plans to buy from, guess what, that horrible and ethical country, Saudi Arabia, the diluent, to stir in the bitumen to get the stuff to be able to move to the pipeline. Every single one of the pipeline projects currently being produced are for one reason only: to get raw bitumen to tidewater to send to some other country for refining. And they have to mix it with diluent that they get from the Middle East. It's a fossil fuel condensate that they stir in the bitumen to try to make it flow, and they call it dilbit. Quick last factoid: yes, in 2013, our emissions were lower than they are today because our emissions have been going up. They briefly went down during the 2008 financial crisis. They went as low in 2009 at 692 megatons that year, but we are rising, predicting by Environment Canada's website to be at 720 megatons by 2020, which was the year for the delivery of Harvard's Copenhagen target of 17% below 2005 levels, which we are nowhere near touching. We're not even scratching within a 5 to 10% reduction. We're nowhere near, 5 to 10% of the target. Okay, sorry. More than 3 minutes, sorry.
I'll just finish Elizabeth's thought on that. I think the gap is 137 megatons
Yes.
for 2020 target, and I agree with her. There's not a snowball's chance of watching. On the intergenerational inequity issue, I agree with Elizabeth's observation that this is something that you can just pass on. as a father of 5 and as a grandfather of 2 and about to be 3, this does concern me. I just wonder what behavior, though, I am going to adopt in order to be able to do, if you will, my pick. And the problem is that, as I indicated earlier, we seem to be kind of in this paralysis. That the problem is so big that we aren't able to move forward, and so people kind of switch off, like how are the Leafs doing, rather than saying, well, how are we going to tackle this problem? Hence my initial comments with respect to how Mr. Trudeau was going to tackle this problem. This may, in all candor, not get us to where we need to be, but at least it's an outline of a plan, and at least it is something that moves you towards actually achieving those goals. And the final comment is with respect to the bogus argument about ethical oil versus terrorist oil. For goodness sakes, people, can't we have a debate a little bit more intelligent than that? On the truth of the matter with respect to Canadian oil is that it is actually greenhouse gas intensive, and that is its major problem. We're not, if it compared to Saudi light crude to Alberta light crude, we would be having this conversation. But the truth of the matter is that it is greenhouse gas intensive. It's also very expensive oil. And as long as the price remains where it is, a lot of projects in Alberta are just simply not viable projects. Final comment. Don't mention the word strategy in Alberta or national energy plan in Alberta. It will be drawn and quartered. And it doesn't mean that it can't and shouldn't be asking for a national energy plan, and as is our opinion of premiums. But the choice of language is very political, and so we do need to arrive at an overall way in which we approach energy in this country, and I'm hoping that we will do that somewhat more sooner than we did.
Thank you. I understand that I'm going to switch to the House of to UBC. Any other questions from there?
Yes. Still digging up on the snow.
Right. Okay. House isn't continuing. How about UBC? Okay, the questions are coming in. So here's some more questions from the audience. We have many, and I'm sorry, I won't be able to get through all of them. But here's one, and there are a number along this line. What are your thoughts on a liberal NDP or NDP liberal coalition? To be part of it. And then, I'll throw this one in as well. Given the importance of the issue, runaway global warming, can the Greens, Liberals, and NDP unite before the election? So why don't I throw those up?
Well, it's on record already that as a party and on, I don't know what one can distinguish between issues, but probably it's safe to say on this issue of all issues, there is most certainly a willingness, an eagerness, in fact, to work with other parties to make progress. It is what we have to do. And I'd like to think we're all always practically oriented in these matters in many ways, and open to working with other parties. On the issue of pre-election stuff, that's fraught with all sorts of technical difficulties. It's fraught with some philosophical difficulties too, I think. I mean, this is a country that I think values its opportunity to choose between different perspectives on matters. And if, as my proposition from my 10-minute speech at the beginning is correct, that we need, in fact, to change our electoral system in order to bring about the kind of collaboration and inter-party coalitions around certain issues. And as far as I know, at this point in time, the Green Party are the only ones that are actually championing a change in the electoral system and the kind of democratic reform that would bring that about. So it would be a bit contradictory to say we're going to do a pre-election coalition with a party that is against bringing in the kind of electoral reform required to deal with climate change.
Talk strategic alliance.
That's my answer to the question.
Well, surprisingly, I hear this quite a lot. I get this question several times a day. So first thing, I think it's important for Canadians, particularly those who get self-described as progressive, to relax a bit. We're going to have to work hard in an election. It's Stephen Harper's time is done. This is the year the Harper era ends, and I'm absolutely certain of it. List of conservatives who aren't running again, and John Barrett is one who got the most notice, but I think if they really thought they were about to get back in, I don't think we would see Mr. Barrett going off where he's gone. Now, it happens to be a motivator for fear. When people are afraid, I don't think they vote for what they want. So I think we need to start driving up voter turnout, because our main issue is not vote splitting, our main issue is vote abandoning. 40% of Canadians didn't vote in 2011 or 2008 or 2006. Had they voted and formed government, they would have been a majority government. We did not vote party, and they could have been. So I say that just to set the context. To answer the question directly, I keep trying. The Green Party is run by our members, not by me. We have a resolution from the membership instructing me and our federal council that does run the party to seek electoral cooperation in a one-time only electoral cooperation agreement with Liberals and the Democrats and anybody else who would agree that we cooperate in one election on the condition that when the election is over, we bring in proportional representation, and I suppose the unsaid end of that sentence is, and never have to cooperate again. I will not waste your time here tonight telling you about any efforts, whether on specific little by-elections trying to talk about cooperating or writ large writing to all my colleagues. I can see that we have a very serious problem, and I think it is not my particular friends here at this table. Actually, all my friends in Parliament, I'm very lucky because I really enjoy the people with whom I work, and I have to tell you, the Conservatives are lovely people too. Everybody's just run by their party leadership, and therefore, when Stephen Harper, who I do not believe accepts climate science, I think he does, as far as I can see, he's never accepted a science briefing ever. I don't understand the science of climate change. We know it isn't his priority. His priority is boosting production of bitumen. His priority isn't even the economy overall. It's production of bitumen and exporting it out of this country to be processed somewhere else. Very strange priority. So cooperating is something I would like to do. But I think you all know that there is this bizarre ancestral hatred between Liberals and New Democrats and Democrats and Liberals. So what you really need is a lot of green MPs who love to vote. No, we need to fix the system this year. So greedy Parliament, I'm not greedy, I just want, 12, 15, 30, not greedy. Green MPs to be a balance of power and force these guys to work together nicely. And these are our problems. John and Matthew are not our problems.
Elizabeth is a terminal collaborator. And it is true that Elizabeth has friends in all parties. And it is also true that I don't think actually Stephen Harper does them. He's not a dumb man. It's not in his political best interest to. Yeah, he's not worried about his kids. He's worried about the 2015 getting elected. That's the way it is right now. The problem with if we announce today that Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Monteiro are going to make nice with each other, that'll probably be not realistic, and it immediately will coalesce the conservative base. I'm living experience of that. With Mr. John and Jack and the block leader at the time formed a coalition. That was the immediate reaction of Mr. Harper's party, and that was the end of it. So no party leader, whether it's the NDP leader or the Liberal Party, is going to announce in advance that he or she is going to collaborate with another party. Like everyone, I'll pick a Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is running for government. Period. End of sentence. And how the electoral chips fall, I don't really know. And I guess we'll address that after the fact. You know, I read the polls as well as other people read the polls. I don't know. You know, that's in March of 2015, and you have to be worried about what's going to happen in October 2015. So I'm a little, how should I say, less sanguine than my colleagues about collaboration and our experience of collaboration didn't work out so well last time. So again, I'm careful what you read.
Okay, we have some questions from UBC. And I know responsive addressed to Matthew Galvin, one's addressed to John Jay, and one is addressed to your speakers. So I'll give you that. The grammar here fails me in some cases, but I'll do the best I can. I was not. I used these well. Appreciate it. Question for Matthew is, how do you envisage the National Energy Board of Planners' future with pipelines? And is the NEB doing enough to consider the effects of climate change? The question for John McCabe. You have stated that a Liberal government's policy would build on carbon prices for policies already in place in several provinces, including Alberta. Yet even with the carbon price, virtually all of Canada's emissions growth is projected to come from Alberta. How would the government ensure that national emissions targets are met when a province's carbon price isn't sufficient? And here's one from ABC. How do you balance, or how do you balancing addressing the carbon emissions from the demand versus the supply?
The one without the direction is green.
Yes. So maybe you can make that the So Matthew, you want to respond about the NEB and future with pipelines?
Yeah, I think the issue, and Tom Mulcair talks about this all the time, and one of the reasons that we say no to any pipeline at this point in time is that we have a assessment system through the NEB to which one simply can't say yes. There is an inappropriate grounds that the NEB uses to assess these matters now. There's the changes, you know, we went into 2011 proposals to change that assessment system, environmental assessment system, and then of course in 2012, I think it's 2012 budget, the act was drastically changed in the scope. Well, let me just follow the process that the NEB uses to assess pipelines was changed dramatically as well. So limited scope of participation was one of the things that they did. They limited the grounds upon which assessments can be made. And so one of the things we've talked about, and there needs to happen, is changing what can be considered by the NEB in these assessment processes. And one is to look at cumulative impacts as a starter of any project to be assessed through pipelines. Two is to look at alternatives, so allow the NEB to assess alternatives to any particular project. And third is to take explicitly the issue of climate change and global warming into account when making your assessment of any project. So, and of course, part of this process is to increase, has to increase participation. Participation is extremely limited for the NED now. So with those three new assessment criteria, we would propose to go into, under an NED government post 2015, into a public consultation process for the public to start to inform what environmental assessments look like and what the authority of the National Energy Board would actually need to assess impact on projects.
So just to remind people of the question, or I'll remind people of the question, which is that, how are you going to do this? Not easy. Clearly, BC is the gold standard here. They're pricing their carbon at $100 a ton. I think that the fact we're approaching somewhere similar to that. And none of those numbers are close to what they need to be. And particularly, the system in Alberta is not a very effective system, and the prices way below the cheap price. I would not be enthusiastic about those negotiations. It would be very difficult negotiations. Jim Prentice, the premier of Alberta, he's a former environment minister. I know he gets it, not, but having said that he gets it, doesn't mean that he doesn't have other realities. The most significant reality, political reality he's facing right now is a big hole in his budget, something where 25% of his revenue coming are hard independent. So I don't anticipate that those discussions will be easy. However, if we are going to have a national system, we can't have some provinces carrying the load and others riding for free. So the mix of incentives and penalties will be a delicate one, and I think that. But I would start those negotiations should start 9 years ago. But those negotiations, in my mind, have to start very early, and there have to be very tough negotiations. Because the industry in Alberta, I think, feels like it's having real difficulties, and it is. You're starting down multiple building development projects. They're going to be very tough to negotiate.
So I'm trying to understand the question I got. But before I'm trying to find politics, and I don't want to put that on stuff, but my understanding is that at this point, the Greens are the only party opposing all Energy East, Keystone, Enbridge, and Kinder Morgan on principle. And I understand the NEP that the NEP had problems with the NEP process, is why they wouldn't be prepared. But I haven't heard a strong statement yet, and I'd love to be wrong on this, but I've not heard the NEP say they're against Kinder Morgan or against Energy. So last thing I saw Mr. Mulcair say was that he was bullish on Energy. I will also, since I've said something negative about Mr. Mulcair for the first time here tonight, have to say that when Justin Trudeau said the federal government doesn't have to lead and can sort of coordinate the provinces lightly, it's very large nonsense sign flies in my head. That is absolute nonsense, and I hope Justin Trudeau is prepared to do better than that. Now, the consumption piece here, which I think is the question I have, is how do you see balancing increasing carbon emissions from demand versus the supply? What I'm hoping that this is demand side management versus supply side management, and how do you go at reducing emissions fast enough? Demand side management, supply side management, I think are essentially, you have to do everything you can on both sides, but there's a temporal difference. Your short-term wins are all on demand side management. You can make a steeper reduction in greenhouse gases for every dollar invested by retrofitting buildings than almost anything else you can do. We have about 30% of our energy inefficiency, greenhouse gases in the economy, about 30% is our building construction. We are heating the outdoors in winter and cooling it in summer. And we're doing it with inefficient lighting overhead. So that's a huge winner, and particularly as a stimulus effort would probably with revolving loans to fund it the way that the Green Municipal Fund works in the Canadian, federal municipalities. What you can do is you have all the trades working to go out and retrofit buildings, because as Amory Lovins said so famously so very long ago, a barrel of oil saved is just as valuable as a barrel of oil found. So megawatts, we've got to go after energy efficiency in an aggressive way. But then while you're doing that, at the same time, you're building up your shifting supply. So your supply side management is replacing fossil fuel sources of energy, particularly our electricity sector should be zero fossil. We have really, really dirty fuel being used in one of the power plants in Nova Scotia. It's pet coke from the bitumen mixed with diluents that get all the way down to Detroit, and they separate out in a refinery, and they have these piles of what they call pet coke, which then gets shipped to Nova Scotia. So for those of you listening at Dalhousie, Pointed Coney is burning pet coke. You look at the coal-fired power plants, the bulk of Alberta's electricity sector, the bulk of Saskatchewan's electricity sector. Thank you again to Ontario for shutting down coal-fired power plants. But it takes a while to ramp up renewables. So it's a time lag issue. The fastest, most cost-effective reduction in greenhouse gases comes from energy efficiency and conservation. And at the same time, you have to build up your renewable capacity.
I don't know if we've got down on some. I've got a lot of questions from Toronto. Okay. Toronto. What we haven't heard, let me just read the question. What role, if any, do you see for nuclear energy in transition away from fossil fuels?
Nuclear. Okay, well, can I go back to the economics that Elizabeth was talking about very briefly about $225 a ton, which I left alone and the fee dividend stuff. If we are talking about rapid demand response to the need for fossil fuels, the fee and dividend and your plan for government revenues, where does the revenue come from? Where does the infrastructure come from to build these things? There is nothing that but it's good in pricing, and so and I want to talk about Tom's position on the pipeline. If we have a system in place, an energy system in place that is fundamentally a democratic system that allows Canadians to participate in the issue of pipelines, then it is not a matter of principle. It is a matter of people being able to come and put to a board alternatives, the issue of climate change, the issue of human impacts, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a process if you have the right criteria, and in the context of making oil uneconomic through demand destruction for fossil fuels, it changes the entire system that we are looking at. On the issue of nuclear, we have a huge problem facing us now, which is dealing with waste and what to do with that. This is not, nuclear power is not a sustainable form of power. It leaves lethal, toxic waste for future generations. The IPCC in their wedge has suggested there's a place for it. 50% of our power in Ontario is coming from nuclear right now. But new build nuclear is clearly not a solution to this issue of sustainable life.
So quickly to respond to Matthew, I haven't mentioned this, but Matt is wonderful, and this is the only other federal member of parliament who marched in New York with me. I just want to mention that. But now I'm going to have to say, well, everybody there knew me. We were all together, a lot of street-50.org buses from Toronto that came down, fantastic, we marched with each other. So here's the thing, fee and dividend is being addressed. I think a lot of you will know, Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby completely won over the membership of the Green Party. So it's a policy resolution passed by our membership, and it actually is very exciting because what it also does is one of our priorities as a party is to get to eliminating poverty through guaranteed livable income. So a direct check to everybody is a start. I mean, it's obviously not a guaranteed livable income to deliver $5,000 to every Canadian over 18. But it's the beginning, because disproportionately, this check will be more to people who are low income than people who are very high income levels. And what it is not only is it revenue neutral, the fee never really comes into, it'd be about $1.5 billion. It never really comes into the federal government revenues because it immediately gets cut from checks and sent back out to Canadians, which is why it has such an attraction across Canada to work with the citizen climate lobby. So, good point. So if that's where your money's going, where do you get the money for infrastructure? Well, you have to tax more. You're going to have to tax the corporate tax rate. The largest and most profitable corporations in this country are taxed half the tax rate that they would be paying if they were in the U.S. We have, thanks to Stephen Harper, we have the lowest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world, half that of the United States. And they called them the job creators when they brought this in. Job creators, they're hoarding the money. The large corporations have over $600 billion right now sloshing around in corporate bank accounts. Quoting Mark Carney again, he's the one who dubbed it the dead money. So, you know, I like my Bible. So I want that dead money like Lazarus to rise up and walk. I want to go out there and create jobs and do that to tax the corporations for me. Okay, I'll move on because our whole tax fund isn't out there. But nuclear energy is a future technology the time has passed. From a long time ago, nuclear energy has no role in replacing greenhouse gases. There are nuclear facilities that we'll have for some time. We should build some new ones. You're looking again at the criteria of $1 invested for maximizing reductions of greenhouse gases. Where do you put it? The last place in the world you put it is in nuclear power. On the economics alone, nuclear does not work.
I'm waiting for a fee and dividends and dead money to walk without water. Last chapter tried that crucified. I hope that's not a board. We get away in Ontario. We get about 55% of our electricity from nuclear, and the problem is that there's no real happy choices here. Dalton gives you can get a lot of credit for, and I can get a lot of criticism for getting us off coal, and now we're
Clean Air Alliance,
imagine something. And as a consequence, I'm told, I'm not sure it was absolutely accurate, that in GTA we want to have a smaller day in the last 2 or 3 years. That's pretty significant accomplishment, after which Mr. McGinty or anyone else hasn't had a lot of credit. In fact, if you talk to a conservative on this panel, they whine to you about the cost of electricity and tell you about the competitive disadvantage that they have with New York State and some other states as well. So these are not happy choices. There's not a lot of Niagara Falls available to produce the power that we need. Coal is clearly out the door. Oil and gas, we don't know a lot in this province. And one of the things that's kind of made things happen for Obama has been the fracking revolution. Well, you know, I think a lot of people are taking a second look at that and saying, well, maybe this is quite the event that was thought in the first instance. So, and then if you talk to the other folks, well, we'll replace it with solar and wind, biomass, and things of that nature. Clearly, those things are ramping up. Clearly, Ontario is poised to be a leader in that area. Clearly, there's 27,000 direct jobs and 25,000 indirect jobs by clean energy. I just don't know that in the short term, by the short term I mean my lifetime, that we will be actually able to wind down nuclear power stations. To be certain, stop building them, and hopefully then start to decommission as we replace nuclear with other forms, hopefully.
Thank you, well, we've got, I think, 5 minutes left. So, nobody will need to up to the panelists to say whatever they like, or should I just throw a couple more questions to them when we end on that? Okay, the latter? What's that? Okay, closing statements from the panelists. So 2-3 minutes each. I'm sorry we couldn't handle all of your questions. There are many excellent questions.
Me first.
Sure.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity tonight to talk about this issue. There's been almost a religious theme. Took my, so, you know, and to spread the gospel then, this, climate change. You know, I believe, coming back to the PR issue, you know, I think, actually, it was the parliamentary secretary that asked me after my speech on 1969, you know, who wants this? You know, I think the answer is Canadians want it. And I think that's right across the country that Canadians want it. We talked about intergenerational change, but I think we do ourselves a tremendous disservice to talking those terms. We are actually, I think, talking about our children, John's children, and grandchildren, Elizabeth's children and grandchildren, and that's who we're talking about. And we're talking about responding to this issue and responding with urgency and rapidity. And the science has been laid out for all of us. We all know it, and I don't know that there's any point talking about that any further. The latest IPCC report is talking in science terms or scientist terminology about levels of probability that yes, this is going to happen. And so it falls, I think, to us, and I think it falls to you guys most certainly, but I think that all of us at the front of the table, Professor Washington, carry a special burden. It's a burden that we as politicians carry that I take extremely seriously, that all of us in my caucus take extremely seriously. And if there's a failing here, this is the group of politicians sitting in the House now, sitting at the front of this table, who own that bit. It's a failing beyond us as politicians in the political system. It's a failing to our fellow humankind. And so it's a huge burden that we carry, one that I accept willingly, and you do so because this is ultimately, when we talk about our kids and fellow human beings, this is ultimately motivated by love of life, love for each other, and on those grounds we simply have to respond. And so I look forward carrying on with this issue and putting my bill forward, and I hope it passes and running in the next election so that we remove Stephen Harper, and so that the three of us can do what we can to work together to bring an end to this in a better way and a sustainable way for all of us to live on this planet.
Well, it's really been a wonderful experience to be on tonight. Other than the questions came across on bits of paper, but I can watching your faces and making eye contact with people I can see. So I didn't get to hear your voices. I see a lot of committed activists in this room who are going to keep working with climate action. So I thought I'd mention a few things because it's always hard to get complete answers with as much detail as I'd like to share. But if you wanted to see where the Green Party is on all these issues, plus more on our website, the document called which covers that. We focus a lot on carbon pricing in the public debate. And from my point of view, carbon pricing is a sine qua non. It's the start. It's not the whole program, it's not the whole plan. You need carbon pricing, and then you need all the other aggressive steps that help make the shift to renewables, that make the shift to retrofitting our buildings, that shift our transportation infrastructure. So for very good information that I relied on, I thought I'd mention a couple websites because it's really hard to get good information these days. How do we actually see ourselves getting from here to where we need to be? One of the best projects that's global, but it has a chapter on Canada, is called Deep Decarbonization. So if you haven't looked up the decarbonization, all one word, decarbonization spelled with Z, deepdecarbonization.org. It's very good. It's quite detailed. It gives you stuff to really dig in, and it's got a specific country chapter on obviously China, US. Also, there's a country chapter on Canada, which is very instructive for how we actually get off fossil fuels. And similarly, for good news information, you can go to cleanenergycanada.org. They put together very good examples of where we're seeing programs that show us the light of day, and that's where it's looking at. So because you're a activist, I thought I'd also leave you with a to-do list. Everyone always wonders what I can do between now and then. Right now, Canada should be preparing for the UN system. In order to get a treaty by Paris in December, the process has determined that we want to see, not wait till that horrible experience in Copenhagen, where after everybody left, the IPCC got a chance to crunch the numbers and see if the collectivity of promises made by all the countries that were there in the background with if they all keep their promises, does it avoid 2 degrees? No, it didn't. Of course, Canada didn't keep the promise. So the system within the UN negotiation, which is all countries, including Canada agreed to this, are supposed to table their pledges to Paris in the first quarter of this year, so by the end of this month. Unfortunately, the language got quite watered down, so it said by the end of the first quarter, for those countries prepared to do so. But this needs to be better known among climate activists. I've asked in Parliament, and of course gotten the typical non-answer from the owner that she reached from party had nothing to do with my question. Similarly, last time I asked her question period, I didn't ask her, I asked Stephen Blaney, Minister of Public Security, if we could organize a scientific briefings for the RCMP so they understand climate change and not write appalling reports on anti-petroleum activists who somehow claim to believe greenhouse gases are causing climate change. Last point, quickly, we need to ensure that climate becomes an election issue. To this, I am totally committed, and I would appreciate your support when the time comes to ensure I get in the leaders debate. I think I'm in by all the rules that were heard on this. Some of the leaders don't want me there, so I would appreciate your support to make sure that I can raise climate throughout the leaders debate. And again, the pledges are due the first quarter of March, through the end of this month, first quarter of 2015, so they can be assessed before Paris. I think it's really important to put a priority on getting the proper, full, comprehensive global deal that we need to go off carbon. We need to achieve it in December 2015 at COP21.
I just wanted to thank Elizabeth and Matt for a relatively civilized meeting. Doesn't happen often. Doesn't happen in the House of Commons. I'm very pleased to be joined at the table by my fellow eco terrorists.
Yes.
I think this politicians are driven by the responses that they get from the population, and you are serious people, and you demand, and you have every right to demand serious responses from us on this particular issue, and I think we responded as best we could over the course of the evening, but you need to carry that forward going into the election, so that someone's not making the door. That's a very pointed question about their party. And I think that will in turn lead to us being a serious nation once again. We're not a serious nation. We're an international rival, we're a joke. And on that respect, 2 weeks, I'm going to Germany. Spend a week in Germany for 2 reasons. One, to see how the Germans are doing alternate energy generation, whether it's solar or whether it's windmills or whether it's biomass or whatever. They in my view, are really the technological leaders, and it's not only just the technology, but the psychology in Germany is switched as well. And we might look at a windmill and say, boy, is that really an ugly piece of technology. The Germans look at it entirely differently. They see it the same way. In fact, they almost don't see it in the same way we don't see fiber wires or telephone wires, which is part of the landscape. Don't think about it. Similarly, they've changed their entire mentality about solar panels. So it used to be you'd look at a roof and say, well, I see you've got solar panels. Isn't that interesting? Now they look at the roof and say, you don't have any solar panels. What's the matter with you? And those are the kinds of deep psychological changes that need to take place in us as speakers. The second reason I'm going there is to participate in a pre-talk conference. I will be an observer. It'll be hosted by the French and Germans, and they are doing the necessary work that we should be doing in order to be serious in Paris. And I dare say that not only will Leona not meet the March target, I dare say she won't meet the June target either. And we will go if Mr. Harper is re-elected. We will go empty-handed into Paris and be criticized, or criticized once again. So I hope I've set out how we would approach it. I hope Mr. Fitzgerald has shown some leadership in this particular area, and I look forward to continuing this debate over time. So thank you all.
We're over time for some years, and I want to thank you all for coming this very engaged audience. And it's been, as Jonathan said, a very simple debate. It's unfortunate we did not consider the spokesman here. And I formulated questions that I thought should certainly be put to them, but I will spare you. And I will just thank you again for illuminating us, and I'm going to call on Alice to wrap things up.
Alice, before you can
Alice organized this.
Alice is one, there's an organizing here for, I want everyone to know, March 14th, somewhere in Toronto, so watch for it. There will be protests against the C-51. Someone told me about it and I came to the mic, and I promised I would announce it, and I almost forgot. Sorry, Alice.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. And thank you everyone for coming today. These are amazing speakers and our moderators, Dr. Weissman. And the people who make this town hall possible, here Angelo, Phila, Lindsay, Joyce, Chloe, Victoria, everyone else. We hope that you have a wonderful night. Before you go, I would like to mention that we have not signed the action letter that's being passed around anymore. Please do sign it for me. It is a letter calling on all four leaders of the major parties in the House of Commons, one of whom is here with us today, to address a few points. And they are that Canada take all reasonable steps forward to cooperate with the international community to reduce its carbon emissions and address the climate crisis in an immediate and responsible manner. The second point is action on climate change will be issued on this upcoming election platform, and you can be included in asking questions at the leaders debate. And finally, all federal parties cooperate with each other for supporting actions and policies on climate change, and also electoral reform to include proportional representation, because it permits expression to the fair and equal evaluation of their ballots and the true priorities of Canadian voters, climate change being a major one. And it promotes cooperation in the House of Commons to address these priorities. Proportional representation of stronger environmental protection and energy use laws. You will please have a look at the letter being handed around. And besides that, thank you again for coming today, and have a wonderful evening.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll send you the video. Yeah.
Whoever has the extra letter that was floating around, can you bring them back to the front, one of us? Thank you.
And also the video, Chris was helping you.
Yeah.
He has been one that I'll remind you to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have one. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, I signed one and then gave it to thank you. It's just the cover sheet. Is there a quick Twitter handle or something?
Outside of the house. Oh, somebody took my bag. It is the way it's not that much. It's actually not. So even if there's a sense of it, so I just want to say and if he's open,
Yeah, don't have that now. I'll take a look through it.
Yeah, exactly. And just ask, you know, hey, if I can't get into I know you did just like SWAT. See you there. Not yet. So how's it going? Oh, really? Okay, that's fine. I mean, it's still wow. Oh, also, don't forget to have Skype. Skype. Not the top of the yeah, if you wear badges, all the Skype people like that. You know, we can point the laptop at them so they can see them, I can see them. And, but just so you know that, yeah, the Skype thing is all on you. It's your computer. It's all your. Yeah, 10 years. You might be able to get the information when you that. But we don't actually we just get the and mics. Yeah, well, it's constantly help. Now we're going to be the help desk there, and they'll be able to do that.
Oh dear.
Yeah, he's still alive. Oh,